What's up, folks? I'm Private Hudson, and this is Dark Angel, Vampire Apocalypse, a Diablo-style action RPG exclusively released for the PlayStation 2. Now, this is a game that you've probably never played, and one that you've probably never ever heard of. And there's a very good reason for that. This game sucks. Let's start Dark Angel together and see what this game is all about. Once it loads up, you're immediately at the title screen. There is no opening video, which is a little odd for a PlayStation 2 game. So at the main menu, you hit Start, select New Game, and again, no video. You're immediately dropped into the middle of a town that is under attack by demons. There is no introduction, there's no mention of any story, you're just immediately under attack. Once you kill the demons, you're told 2 other towns are under attack as well, so you set off and clear those towns out too. Then you realize that these are the only 3 towns in the entire game, and they're all simply the size of the screen. There are no buildings that you can enter. Each town is just made up of 2 merchants and a couple of no-name NPCs that never have anything of value to say. Alright, so all 3 towns have been cleared out for monsters. Now what do? Whatever you want, because this game is packed with over 300 hours of gameplay. It's one of the longest PlayStation 2 experiences you could ever have. So what is there to do? Well, the only story that this game has is completely bare bones and only exists in its manual. Turns out, in 1 year, the big bad Shadow Lord appears and will destroy the whole world, meaning these tiny 3 little villages. You play as Anna, a champion of light. The manual goes into more detail regarding just how strong she is, so let's read a brief excerpt from it. Anna can run quickly from region to region. As she is a lone warrior, she's able to slip back and forth across the besieged land without fear of being molested. Okay, enough with the manual. So you have a year's worth of game time to farm and grind so that you could become strong enough to defeat the big bad Shadow Lord. Each town is situated next to a battleground and a dungeon. Battlegrounds are mostly there for the game's small pool of randomly generated generic quests. If you visit a battleground that doesn't have an active quest currently in it, then you'll find a monster generator which, as you can imagine by the name, generates monsters until you destroy it. Dungeons are where you'll spend most of the time grinding in and doing quests in as well. Dungeons have an infinite amount of levels, and obviously monsters get tougher with each level. These dungeons are randomly generated when you start a new game, meaning if you load your save, it's not going to change any layout. Dungeon layouts have been predetermined as soon as the game starts. There are 3 different species of monsters, with each species having their own respective dungeon, and each species only has 4 types of enemies in said species. So, yeah, 4 types of enemies per 3 species, simple math, 12 enemies in the entire game. Well, aside from the big bad Shadow Lord. But don't worry, sometimes the monsters have a slightly different color palette, or sometimes they're bigger and taller. The developers try to implement a form of item variety, but it ended up being lazy, just like the rest of the game. Alright, so again, each species is made up of 4 enemy types. 2 are weak to one weapon, while 2 are weak to another. By game design, I assume that the developers intended for you to carry a saber and a broadsword when entering the necropolis, because sabers do more damage to vampires and ghouls, while broadswords do more damage to fiends and ghosts. Same can be said for the Forgotten who live in the Lost City. Scythes do more damage to hunters and Dracu, while maces do more damage to titans and slayers. Lastly, we have the mutants who live in the Lost Forest. Axes do more damage to the devolved and crawlers, while vampire swords do more damage to the biomechs and cerebri. So the developers intended for you to carry and switch between weapons depending on what area you're grinding in. The issue here is that once you get a couple of levels down into any of the game's dungeons, well, there's only 3, you start seeing monsters from other areas. So what I end up doing is just I carry a vampire sword with me into every single area that I go to. The special attack has Life Leech, which you trigger by holding down the attack button. Now, Life Leech does not work on the undead, but since you come across monsters from another area, in the Necropolis, it's still useful, and it's way easier to just use that to get back health instead of having to go to your inventory, equip a health potion, try to use said health potion without getting attacked, which will interrupt the entire goddamn sequence. Besides, 2 monsters of each species are already so weak and fragile that equipping a weapon just for them is completely unintuitive. In the Necropolis, I always use a saber. Why? Because the broadsword is useless, and its special attack takes forever to charge up. The saber has a quick jabbing attack for its special, and the ghosts are already incredibly weak to begin with. So there's no point in having to constantly change weapons just for them. Same thing for the Forgotten in the Lost City. I always have a vampire sword because I can always lifesteal from them. And my other weapon of choice is always the mace. The fire-breathing dinosaurs and the hunters, well, they're already incredibly weak, so I see no reason of ever having to use a scythe against them. I just use the mace, always. There's some other items that can be found in shops, such as guns and bombs. Guns are all pistols, variations of pistols, and at the beginning of the game, they're ridiculously expensive, and you need to constantly buy ammo for them, and they're really, really weak. Gold becomes a non-issue after a few hours in, but these items still end up being weak and worthless, and I never use them, and I've never found any reason to ever use them. The rest of the itemization revolves around defensive items, such as armor, boots, and bracers. You never get any real stats about any of the items. All the items just have an item level. But I suppose you can assume that level 10 armor has a better defensive rating than level 7 armor, but it never shows you how much of an increase this is. Further into the game, you do come across items that have bonus stats. Finally, you find boots that allow you to fly, which is a comical way of draining your mana out for no reason. Weapons can be found that have bonus experience or bonus damage to certain enemies, or even elemental damage. Armor can have elemental resists, but without a true character sheet, these numbers, to me, are meaningless. And Dark Angel is never challenging enough to invest any amount of time in creating an optimal loadout. The game is designed like this. Whenever you gain a level, your stats level up depending on what area you're farming in. If you're in the Lost Forest, for example, and you level up, your strength goes up by 3, your intellect goes up by 1, and your health goes up by 2. However, the game is designed in such a way that it'll force you to farm all dungeons equally, as you can only go so far down in one dungeon without eventually hitting a brick wall when it comes to monster strength. Once you hit that wall, you pretty much have to farm another dungeon. Eventually you'll level up, your stats will become more balanced, and you'll have more equipment. Each dungeon also has a unique pickup that you can take back to its respective town that will permanently boost one of those 3 stats by 1 point. Looking back at old forum posts, some people believe that the most efficient way to play the game was by clearing every single floor to search for these stat boosting items. I think this is a complete waste of time, and as a matter of fact, I think this entire game is a complete waste of time. As far as the quests are concerned, they're all boring and generic. You either kill a boss, you either rescue someone, you either kill all monsters somewhere, you donate resources. That's pretty much it. The rewards are always a paltry amount of gold. But by doing quests, you'll help develop the town. Each town specializes in either economics, research, or military, but these are just pointless numbers that have no effect on the game whatsoever, aside from unlocking a weapon that you will need to fight the big bad Shadow Lord. But aside from that, they have no effect on the game whatsoever. Once you reach 450 points into one of these categories, you will unlock one of those weapons. So the goal is to gain 450 points into all 3, so you can get all 3 weapons and fight the big bad Shadow Lord. The truth is, once the Shadow Lord does appear, you don't actually have to go and fight him immediately. So that 1-year timer is a fictional timer. Once he spawns, he just stays there forever until you go and challenge him. So you can continue to farm all you want. There's also no penalty in dying. You lose 3 days of game time, but since I've just explained that game time doesn't matter, that means that dying doesn't matter either. Dark Angel is like the myth of Sisyphus, but in a game format. It's a constant, seemingly never-ending loop, But unlike Sisyphus, you have a choice here. You can turn off your PlayStation 2. You can play a different game. I also don't think that many people who have played this game have finished it, as no one has uploaded any ending footage of it on YouTube. Well, one guy did, but he cheated. He not only emulated the game, but he also emulated a Game Shark to skip the 300 to 400 hour grind. If that is not enough to invalidate his method, he also stretched the aspect ratio. Ugh. But he did it for a good cause, I guess, since if you were to put yourself through all these hours of repetition, all you'd get is just a victory screen. And that's it. Done. End of the game. The saddest thing about Dark Angel was that it actually had potential. The aspect of building up towns, making the civilians stronger, and so on. It's a good one. I like it. Hinterland is a flawed action RPG that you can find on Steam. It has a similar concept and is a much deeper game. Still flawed, but deeper than this. Going back to Dark Angel, if the villages developed visually and economically, and if there were more enemy types, more variety in quests, better dungeon layouts, this would have been an alright game. And no, I did not finish it, but I will admit I did spend quite a bit of time in it, and I don't know why. The only positive thing I can say about Dark Angel is the rocking soundtrack. It does fade in and out at random, probably some kind of coding error, and it doesn't even fit the game's dark fantasy theme, but the pseudo hard rock metal tunes are kind of catchy, and I do like them. I admit I kind of like them. The rest of the sound design, on the other hand, is terrible. The limited variety of enemies have an equally limited variety of sound effects. Their death sounds are annoying, and the background sounds of owls hooting and something squeaking that, in fact, sounds more like a dog whimpering is extremely annoying and extremely aggravating to hear over and over again in the background. What doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever is that these same exact developers had already released pretty much the exact same game on the Sega Dreamcast, which was called Armada. It was released about a month or two after the console launched in 1999. It was a space shooter RPG that was also one long grind, but it had so much more to it. First of all, there were several different races that you could choose from. Each race had their own unique ship that would eventually unlock its own unique skills. The enemy types were more interesting, the soundtrack fit the theme, it had actual voice acting, and out in space you'd come across friendly NPCs that would either aid you or ask you for help. The best part, since it was a Dreamcast game, it supported 480p, and it still looks sharp and good to this day. It also had 4-player local co-op, and I played it with 2 other guys back in the day. And it was a blast, especially since we all had different ships with different abilities. The only thing that Dark Angel has over Armada is the fact that Dark Angel runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second. There's no slowdown, there's no hitching, there's no stuttering. But then again, when you make a game that is so bare bones that there is barely anything in it, at the very least, it has to run good. And with that being said, it's time to close out this video. I originally played this game right after graduating from junior high, which I believe was around 2002. It wasn't my copy that I played. I ended up buying this copy many years later, just for a few bucks, because this game is cheap, and it's terrible in a way that it's kind of hard to forget. If you've played through this game, please let me know down in the comments below. Tell me what you thought of it. Also, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. See you folks next time.